Section E, 4,675 metres long, 726 metres missing, 16%. The Vallum in this section seems to appear some distance from the River Hadrian on the west side, but this could be due to building work in recent years. However, the course of the Vallum stays on or very close to the raised height of the River Eden, which we suspect is feeding the Vallum's ditch with water. We have noticed within the LiDAR map a probable prehistoric dike feeding into and past the Vallum and wall, terminating in the raised water levels of what is known as Brunstock Beck to the north. This strange kink, which is now a road, suggests that it was once a dike that's been built upon by the current road, which has left a significant impression on the landscape. This is proven as the straight wall takes a bend at the point of intersection, going along the road, only to head off again when the road heads in a different direction. This close connection to this dike could also be seen in this section in the place names such as Dyke's Castle and Baron's Dyke. Not only do we see this ongoing link with paleochannels in this section, but moreover, we see that the Vallum is deliberately built over natural springs, which would have flooded the ditch. So are we seeing bad engineering by the builders, or a way to power the Vallum as a canal without the use of locks? Moreover, at excavations near Hadrian's Wall at Terranbury Lane in 1976, we find that the Vallum had been cleaned out and backfilled with a clay subsoil. Is this more evidence of the Romans using the ditch as a canal? The many interconnected ditches that connect to the Vallum at this point looks like a Roman water management system regulating the Vallum's water levels. After the initial cut, we see that clay was used in line with the Vallum and associated ditches as a waterproofing material. Was this added when the water levels dropped during the 2 centuries of the Vallum's existence? The excavation also found evidence of Mesolithic activities through dykes buried within the environment. These dykes were identified as late glacial features. Sadly, this is the norm for archaeologists who fail to see the features as natural rather than artificial. Section F, 5,500 metres long, 3,415 metres missing, 62%. Analysis of this section shows that the wall and Vallum are nearby, unlike many areas, with the wall avoiding the valley areas in the east, but the Vallum heading directly into them. The Vallum, consequently, in this section fades in comparison with the wall's ditch, which seems to indicate that it was built sometime before the wall or even the Roman occupancy. This can be seen when the Vallum enters and exits the paleochannels within the old river valleys. Within part of this section of the wall and Vallum, we find a very interesting and little noticed feature. A large mound can be seen on both the OS and LiDAR maps. The mound, which most archaeologists call a motte, is 12 metres in diameter even today. It has been suggested that this area was used to quarry stone for the wall, but our survey clearly shows that the disruption was caused by Mesolithic waters long before the wall was built, and only the section connected directly to the wall may have been quarried. This is confirmed by the Historic England scheduled monument details of this section. Section G, 5,717 metres long, 3,696 metres missing, 65%. The Vallum in this section fades in and out depending on the location of the valley floor. The OS maps give it up in the east of the section, for it to appear again in the west of the section with no evidence to be found over the central valley floor. Another unexplained feature is a Roman fort built to the south of the wall for no reason unless it's associated with the Vallum. The OS map suggests that the Vallum came to the fort from the east and then took a bendy route around the camp's base. But this is not evident at all on LiDAR maps, which shows the Vallum disappearing into the valley floor, then comes out around the Roman fort for no apparent reason, only to disappear again. What LiDAR shows is that in prehistoric times the area consisted of a dike that the Romans used later for both the Vallum and the wall. Consequently, the Roman fort must predate the wall, which will have no strategic significance as it's too far south. Therefore, are we seeing the early days of the Vallum when the Romans used the existing prehistoric dykes to connect forts using the large rivers, and then later adapted the Vallum and the wall's ditch? Although English heritage suggests that the dyke is older than the Roman building. Section H, 5,556 metres long, 794 metres, 14% missing. Again, the Vallum in this section fades in and out, especially in the valley floor. The area is full of quarries of unknown date, with the sporadic Vallum bank moving from a single bank in the west to a double bank in the east side of this section. The LiDAR maps and satellite images show there is no obvious reasons for the change in design when coming out of the paleochannels, the river valleys, unless it was constructed at different times with different work crews. There is also another feature that could help date the Vallum, as it intersects a suspected Roman fort in this section. The Vallum cuts through this feature, but so does a double paleochannel which extends beyond the Vallum towards the wall's ditch and down the other side of the river valley. I would suggest it was a prehistoric cross dike, passing through a prehistoric site, as no Roman findings have ever been discovered to date at this feature. To the east side of section H, we see a wall ditch split away from its original line, turning north for reasons to date unexplained, unless of course it was seeking water for its defensive ditch. The only other logical conclusion to this anomaly is that the paleochannel was still running when the turf wall was constructed, thus caused engineering problems as the remake avoids the river valley completely. Section I, 5,442 metres long, 2,986 metres missing, 54%. The first variation with the Vallum in this section is the massive change in its construction in the east, linked to a 30-degree change in direction for no apparent reason. The Vallum in this section has an old wall, and the banks are quite pronounced until they reach this 30-degree turn, where they become very flat, and the centre strip seems to become a single bank rather than the original two banks. This strange anomaly may be due to either the two sections being built at a separate time period, or the sections being used for something quite different to its original design, or even something simpler, as the two work sections are poorly connected after the course correction. If we exaggerate the landscape by a factor of 5 using the AI engine within the LiDAR maps, we can see the extent of the difference between the two sections. We can see the east side of the Vallum may have stopped within the paleochannel before the change occurred, maybe to have another section added at a later date to link with the ditch, but not the bank. Thus, to continue the channel being the main reason for the connection. This section is also of interest. It is the first section to claim that it had a road incorporated into it called the Military Way. A linear feature on the LiDAR map claimed to be a Roman road, which is Military Way on OS maps. But when looking at the scale of construction compared to the substantial banks of the Vallum, this is very questionable about its use. If you wanted to have a road to patrol the wall, would you not use one of the two raised banks of the Vallum as they already exist? The evidence suggests not only was this construction very minor, but it led nowhere in particular, and at best joined the bank of the Vallum to the Roman station. The flyover of section I shows that the Vallum disappears each time it enters the river valley, indicating that at the time of construction it was full of water. This supports my post-glacial flooding hypothesis and possible prehistoric dating of the aspects of the Vallum which Romans reused. This reusing of the prehistoric features is not only limited to the Vallum in this section. To the north of the wall is claimed another Roman road called Maiden Way, which seems to have been another prehistoric dyke that has been reused as a road later in history. Details of the alignment and construction of Maiden Way can be found on a separate video. Section J, 5,213 metres long, 803 metres, 15% missing. There is many strange aspects to the Vallum, and in this section the most obvious problem is the peculiar kink that looks like it's a recut of the original pathway going into a mining quarry. From the east it disappears into the river valley as seen in previous sections to reappear out of the valley and turn northeast, go straight again west, then turn southeast to disappear into this massive quarry pit. Is this an indication of the Vallum's purpose? The Vallum in this section is associated with the lower land and the river valley for most of its course. So much so that to the west of the Vallum is at the base of a hill. This would make it incredibly vulnerable to attack from either the north or south if it were a defensive feature. The other anomalies that are claimed in this section include Military Way and Staingate roads. Sadly, the LiDAR shows them not to be quite what to be expected for such famous features. Staingate, on the western section of this sector, comes out of the river valley, then heads towards the Roman camp, but then, at the last minute, runs away to another river valley and disappears again. What we find from the LiDAR maps is that there is absolutely no objective evidence for Military Way, which is reflected in the fact that it does not exist in the original large-scale OS maps and was added in the 1920s as a theory with limited archaeological support, which we can now see. This is the same in both east and west of this 5-kilometre section of the wall. As for Staingate Road, after it missed the fault and went into the river valley, although OS maps have continued the road to the fault, LiDAR catches it coming out of the river valley after the fault and then going off east. The best evidence and my smoking gun of the use of the Vallum by the Romans can be found in an excavation done in 1909 to 1912 by Frank Gerard Simpson. This was undertaken in Portross Burn to give us the best indication of the reuse of a prehistoric dyke by the Romans, who added an extension down to the river embankment. On these excavation plans, it seems that the original dyke of unknown date seems to have finished at point O when the Portross Burn was 115 metres high. This is reflected in the Vallum on the other side, which to date has not been excavated, and so we don't know if the same elaborate stonework was used on the eastern side of the burn. When the water levels fell in Roman period, the Romans constructed a stone lining to the Vallum at 45 metres. The LiDAR scan shows that the river valley was massive, The western section seems to be extended and finished deeper than the eastern side of the Vallum on the other side of the burn, as shown on the cross-section position of O on the excavation plan, which is 150 metres OD. And on the other side of the burn at 150 metres, the Vallum seems to start again. This indicates that water was present in the valley at the time of the original construction. This engineering shows that the extended Vallum, supported with additional stonework, would have met the Roman period's new lower water levels, and that it was constructed, moreover, as a canal to meet the rivers of the past. This is the end of part 2 of 4.